Hey folks, this is Kalani. Patch 9.1 will be introducing a new mega dungeon alongside all of the other forms of content, so we have some more small group PvE adventures to look forward to as well. Mega dungeons have been incredibly exciting when they were introduced in the past, and from what we've tested this time around, this is going to be no exception. Tazavesh, the Veiled Market, is a mysterious place where brokers go to do business, so that means there should be plenty of shiny loot for us to steal. Well, it just became available for testing for the very first time, so let's see how this new mega dungeon is shaping up and walk you through the Veiled Market. Let's start with unlocking the mega dungeon because there is a small quest line before you can even visit the area where the dungeon is located. Don't worry about a lengthy attunement process though. These quests do have a little bit of legwork involved, but it's mostly just running around talking to different NPCs, definitely much faster than both Karazhan and Mechagon. You get sent to a few different zones to find out how you can secure passage over to the Tazavesh market, but eventually you will earn your place on a floating boat. Being able to casually sail through the Shadowlands opens up so many questions of where else these brokers could take us, but for now we're just headed to Tazavesh, the Veiled Market. This entire zone is the dungeon, and the entire dungeon is one massive marketplace, so try not to get lost. They have customs officers preventing unwanted travelers from accessing the lucrative market, a massive mailroom for sorting all of their ins and outs, most of which don't seem to be particularly safe. There's an auction area where the sale of exotic items and animals doesn't always go as planned, and there's even a private club where only the most esteemed guests can chill and hang out while enjoying some live music. We also take a trip to some past expansions. We have a stopover in Legion to deal with some Murlocs, as well as a brief interlude with a pirate dragon in one of our favourite Battle for Azeroth zones. All of these areas are used to amazing effect in the dungeon as you progress through, and it really feels like a massive interwoven experience. It flows really well, you get to explore pretty much everything in Tazavesh, and the dev team has made it a lot of fun. At the very start of the dungeon, you're going to have to make your way past customs, and because they don't really like us, and I guess we don't really like them, that mainly consists of killing anything in our path. Probably not the correct way to get through customs, but it usually works out for most of our adventures, right? The customs area also has a large portal system, probably used to move security troops around the Veiled Market quickly to answer various threats, so obviously we can't have that working against us, so we knock out the mini-boss here, the Portalmancer, and take control of the portals for ourselves. But not before the alarm is triggered and our first boss, General Grievous, makes his grand entrance with lightsabers in hand. Okay, it's not General Grievous, but it may as well be. Look at that amazing model, and those swords are beautiful. This boss was actually a lot of fun. He has various abilities to slow you down. He will knock your weapons out of your hands randomly, confiscating them, so you have to find them and pick them back up before you can continue DPSing. He has a shield that rotates around him slowly and absorbs any damage coming from the side that the shield is blocking, so you'll have to constantly move around the boss. He throws down swirly swords for you to dodge, but his main ability is interrogation. He picks a random target and starts chasing them, so a fairly standard run away from the scary boss mechanic, but at the end of the interrogation he will trap you in a containment cell and then keep coming for you. That cell needs to be DPS down to break the effect, otherwise the boss will slice and dice you up while you're stunned. The cell also has quite a lot of health, so the interrogation target needs to run pretty far away from the boss, and then your group needs to break you out ASAP. Overall, it's a fun fight with a good mix of mechanics. After we pass through customs, you enter the market proper. We get to see all sorts of goods on offer, like corehounds, dragonhawks, bumblebees, you know, the usual. Some of these creatures aren't particularly secure either, so they add to the trash that you have to work your way through. The market is where you will find the next 3 bosses in their own special areas. The first boss is called the Menagerie, and it takes place in the auction room where an auction just and so happens to be going on right as we arrive. This boss is actually 3 bosses, or mini-bosses, and you have to kill them one after another. Each boss introduces its own mechanics that persist for the rest of the fight, so it gets a bit harder as the new bosses come out. The first boss is a Devourer. He will periodically pull everyone to him. He will create massive AoEs that you have to dodge in between, but his main ability is Gluttonous Feast. This is a debuff that deals damage over time to the target, as well as damage to nearby allies who stand too close. Whenever this debuff expires, it jumps to the nearest ally, so you will have this debuff for the entire fight, even after the Devourer dies. The second mini-boss in this event is an Anima Construct from Bastion. He will throw a massive AoE on 2 players who need to spread out. He will sometimes shield himself and pummel your tank, so you need to break the shield and interrupt him, and then he also throws out a whole bunch of blue Anima Orbs. If you get hit by these orbs, you'll get a debuff that reduces your damage done by 5%, and yes, it does stack all the way to 100% reduced damage, so don't get hit by the orbs. But if you have the Gluttonous AoE debuff from the Devourer boss, you can actually suck up these orbs to gain a damage boost instead. So the player with that debuff should eat up as many orbs as they can before the debuff passes on to the next player, and rinse and repeat. When this mini boss dies, he will also still send out those orbs, so you'll be dodging or soaking them for the last mini boss as well. The last round of this trio is Venza Goldfuse, and she just stole a very powerful artifact. She doesn't have too many abilities though. She will cast Chains of Damnation, which reduces the target's movement speed by 100% until the chains are broken, and then she also uses Whirling Annihilation, which is a big AoE that sucks players in towards her. As long as you aren't too close, it really doesn't do too much. It is a fun 3-phase fight that has persistent mechanics. The next boss takes place in the Mailroom, or I should say, the next boss is the Mailroom. This is a crazy fight with lots of mechanics. The boss will target a random player with Money Order, which drops a massive collection of coins on their head, so you have to split that damage between your group. The boss will also use Fan Mail. I guess there's a lot of fan mail just sitting around because the boss whirls it all around the room, dealing a bunch of damage to your entire group. I love the names of the abilities on this fight. It's too perfect. Then the mail portal will also open up and randomly spout out various goodies for you to deal with. There are purple potions that need to be soaked, otherwise they leave a big puddle on the floor that deals a lot of damage, and then you also get unstable goods. Now, I don't know which of you is mailing explosives in the Shadowlands, but that's probably not a good idea. These bombs need to be handled carefully. You can pick them up and throw them around, but if you throw them onto the floor, they immediately explode, dealing a massive amount of damage. If you leave them too long, they explode, dealing a massive amount of damage. You need to throw them into an open mail portal. There are a few of these to pick from, but only one will be open at a time. If you can see the air zooming upwards, that mail portal is open, and you can throw your bombs in there to get rid of them. You can also throw the bombs to other players if they stand still to play past the parcel, which is super fun. After you've taken care of the mailroom, you'll need to find a way into the super special bar, but to do that you'll need to run a few errands and complete a favour or two for the brokers just outside. This is another fun minigame in the dungeon. There's an item that you can purchase from the vendor just outside the bar, and that item appears in the world. You need to pick it up and carry it to one of the broker vendors in this area. Each broker has a speciality, so there are gem brokers, weapon brokers, tailors, leatherworkers, alchemists. You get the idea. The items will have a very obvious recipient. Rare gems go to the gem broker, weapons go to the weapon broker, musical instruments go to the musician broker. It's your standard trading game that many RPGs love to include in one form or another, and you have to do this 3 times. Carrying an item does slow you down, so you'll want a quick class to pick up the items to speed things up, and mobs will constantly spawn while you're trading between brokers, so your group will need to take care of those in the meantime. But overall, I think the minigame was pretty fun, and it shouldn't hinder you that much at all when you get the hang of where each broker is located. The brokers also don't change location by the looks of things, so there won't be any really big random factors to consider, which is always nice. When you've completed the trading minigame, you can enter the Oasis Bar. This is actually where the fourth boss is located. The current band playing in here is not pleasing the crowd, so they get teleported out, and it's on your group to pick up the instruments and entertain the masses. There's a drum kit, a guitar, a saxophone, a trumpet, and a microphone. Each instrument works in a similar way. Throughout the fight you'll see notes appear on the floor, and you'll need to use your instrument to collect the notes. Each note will give you a stack of a very useful damage, healing, and haste buff to help you clear the boss encounter. This is another wave type boss where you have quite a few trash mobs to deal with before the actual boss itself pops out. The boss doesn't have too many mechanics. This fight seems to weigh heavily on the instruments to keep things interesting. He does have an AoE interrupt that can and should be interrupted. He will play small AoEs on every player, so everyone needs to spread out with that. He has a large knockback effect called crowd control, which is really funny, but as long as you don't stand in front of the boss during the cast, you shouldn't have any problems with it. And then he just does a lot of tank damage. If you play your instruments well and collect the notes, the huge buff that you get lets you melt through the vast majority of this fight, and when you get the hang of how each instrument works, it's an incredibly simple minigame, but I think it's something that most players will still have fun with. This boss will be the last boss for the lower half of the dungeon when it gets split for Mythic Plus. Things change quite dramatically after this point. You kind of leave the market behind and hop through a few portals to various locations, but before that you'll need to take down the fifth boss, which is one of the most interesting dungeon bosses I've seen in a long time. This boss will throw out little portals with shapes above them. If you step into the circle portal, you appear at the other circle portal. The same thing goes for the triangle and square portals. This is going to be very important for dodging the other main ability in this fight. The boss will create an expanding circle of energy. It starts small, but eventually it passes over the entire encounter space, so you can't really avoid it. If you get hit by this wave of energy, it deals a massive amount of damage over time, so ideally you want to avoid it. To do that, you will need to make use of the portals. It starts off relatively easy. Look for a portal that is close to the spawn point for the circle, find the other portal with the same icon, and boom, teleport across the wave. But as the fight progresses, the boss starts splitting up the room. First it's split into two, but towards the end of the fight it's split into four. You cannot pass through these walls and they create line of sight, so you have to find the area with the portal that you need to go through, and then look at the other end of that portal and see if you have to go through triangle to get to circle to get to square to finally be safe. It's a lot of jumping around and it's going to take a lot of practice. I had so much fun figuring out which portals you had to take in which order to avoid the wave, but sometimes it's not immediately obvious, so this is definitely a fight that will cause a lot of issues for some groups, but I still thoroughly enjoyed it. To add on top of all of those abilities, the boss also uses triple technique, which needs to be interrupted 3 times in a row to stop it, otherwise he deals a lot of damage to your group. So your entire group needs to stay clumped together in the same little quadrant to make sure you can actually interrupt him. It's a crazy fight with lots going on, but it's also a lot of fun. After that boss, we portal on over to Stormheim. I don't know if this area was just used as an excuse to cram as many Murlocs into this dungeon as possible, but that's kind of what it feels like. There are so many Murlocs here, which is great if you love to kill Murlocs, I guess. While most of these Murlocs are your run-of-the-mill trashy trash monsters, some of them are quite dangerous, which makes pulling large packs in this area a bit problematic, and I do wonder how much value this area will have when this dungeon is split into 2 for the Mythic Plus system. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, I suppose. You can find the next boss in a Titan-like structure on the other side of the Murlocs. This boss was also pretty fun, but it suffered from quite a few bugs which made it difficult to complete the main puzzle. Throughout the fight, the boss will become immune and start filling up the room with a big AoE. 4 different coloured orbs will spawn in the middle of the room, and you have to take them to the 4 Titan consoles at the sides of the room, but there's a specific pattern that you have to put the orbs in to stop the boss's ability. To find the pattern, one player needs to run on over to the central Titan console and click on it. This tells you where each orb needs to go. Your group really has to work together on this one, which might be hard if you don't have access to voice comms or you're running with a pug group, and when each orb is placed in the correct location, the boss gets zapped and the ability stops, so you can go back to DPSing him. Sadly, the orbs kept randomly disappearing, so we couldn't complete the puzzle most of the time. We actually only made it work once, and we had so many pulls on this boss. But hopefully all of that will be sorted by the time the dungeon goes live for real. The boss has a few other abilities as well. He had a cleave ability, which you have to dodge out of. A yellow laser will target random players and chase them, leaving an AoE on the floor. You should run this to the side of the room, avoiding any of the areas where you have to stand to place orbs or use consoles. And then he also does a lot of tank damage. There's also an ad that spawns that has to be dealt with quickly because they channel a huge damage reduction buff onto the boss, and you can't interrupt it either. So they need to be stunned, knocked away, any hard crowd control really, and nuked down. If the ads are alive during the orb phase, they actually run over to a console and prevent you from interacting with it, so they have to die, otherwise you won't be able to complete the puzzle and you're just gonna die to the massive AoE. When the various bugs are fixed on this fight, I think it will be a lot of fun, but I still see it causing a lot of issues for any group that isn't coordinated or working together. After that boss, you hop through another portal, and this time you end up on a beach in Borealis with the pirate dragon I just know everyone is itching to hear about. There are a few parts to this fight, but overall it ended up being rather underwhelming, which is super disappointing in an otherwise mind-blowing mega dungeon. There are a few abilities in this fight, like the offshore ship firing a harpoon at one player and dragging them towards the water, which doesn't seem to really drag you at all right now, so that's bugged, I guess. The water is deadly, by the way. If you pop into the water for too long, you're going to die, so I guess that's why you need to worry about the ship trying to drag you out to sea. If this ability actually pulls you in, then that could be a problem. The ship also bombards the encounter area, so just avoid the swirlies and that's no issue, but the main mechanic or gimmick of this fight are the ads. A bunch of ads constantly spawn from the edge of the water and join the fight. They also have a bunch of health, so DPSing them down isn't really a valid option, but the boss has a rather nifty ability called Infinite Breath. This is a very large cone which is very clearly telegraphed, and it deals a bunch of damage and stuns anyone who gets hit, but it also one-shots any of those ads if they're in the blast. So the idea is simple: round up the ads so they're decently close together and blast them with the Infinite Breath while dodging it yourself. We found that the further away the boss was from the shore, the larger the breath cone became, and thus the easier it was to nuke down the ads. That's kind of it for this fight though. There isn't too much else going on, so as long as you kill the ads with the breath and don't get overwhelmed, you should win without any issue. And then we come to the final boss of the dungeon. These last few very much are boss to boss to boss to boss. That's going to make the upper half of this dungeon very quick when it gets turned into Mythic Plus, but this last boss might be one of the most visually stunning bosses we've had in a very long time, with some awesome mechanics. In the first phase, you get some assassin ads that need to be nuked down and interrupted. There's some unavoidable damage through the Hyperlight Spark, which is more or less the same ability as Artificer from Castle Nathria, but the real ability here is Collapsing Star. This spawns a big shiny orb that will explode for lethal damage if it isn't soaked, but each time you touch the orb it explodes and gets a bit smaller. Each explosion applies a short damage over time effect that will stack, so you want to wait for the debuff to expire before soaking the orb again. You have to soak the orb a total of 4 times for it to disappear, so as long as you do this slowly, you shouldn't die immediately. And then when you get the boss low enough, we'll go into phase 2. The boss goes all Archon on us and turns into a massive energy being and creates these 5 relics around her. Each relic gives the boss 99% damage reduction while it's linked to her, so you have to break the links. To do this, you have to hit them with the Hyperlight Bolt ability. The ability shoots between every player in your group. You can see the arrows clearly marked on the floor of where the bolt will go. To get the bolt to hit a relic, you just need the arrow to pass through it. So to break all of the links, you have to hit all of the relics with the bolt. You don't have to do this with a single shot, although that is very possible. You have 5 players, so you can hit all 5 relics with the same bolt if you position properly. There's probably going to be an achievement tied to that, but as long as you break the relic links, you can continue to damage the boss. The boss will re-link with the relics several times and even move the relics around, so you're going to have to break the relics several times. The boss will also cause the relics to explode, causing projectiles to shoot forth in all directions. This bounces from relic to relic until all of them have exploded, and she'll also do this several times throughout a fight, so you probably don't want to stand too close to any of the relics until you need to break them. You can always see which relic will explode first because the boss will face it as she casts the ability, so you know which one to move away from first. This ability looks amazing, and it blew us all away the first time it happened. I love that this fight has quite a few abilities, and dangerous abilities at that. It's going to be a great last boss to finish off your dungeon runs. Now you may be thinking, holy cow, this is a huge dungeon, which is super cool, no doubt, but what about the corpse run? Inevitably, we're going to die and we have to run back to wherever we were, right? Do we have to run back through the entire dungeon if we die on one of the later bosses? The answer is no, providing you keep your eyes open for some very special portals. Do you remember the portals from the first boss's area? Well, there are various portals throughout the dungeon which you can activate to create a link to that first boss area, which is also more or less where you appear when you die. So as long as you activate the portals throughout the dungeon, you can skip through the vast majority of the market and head straight to the boss you're currently working on. There's even a portal right to the end boss when you get there, so that's extremely convenient. But that is our first look at the new mega dungeon Tazavesh the Veiled Market coming in patch 9.1. I think the vast majority of players are going to have a blast with this one, and I think it's going to be a lot more fun when compared to both Karazhan and Mechagon. There are less frustrating mechanics, there are a lot of fun encounters that change things up a bit, and the entire place is visually stunning. I can't wait to play through this for real when the patch finally launches, but what do you think from what you've seen so far? Are there any areas or bosses that look amazing to you? How do you feel about so many special or different mechanics being included in this dungeon? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to everyone who's subscribed on Twitch. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching, folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.